Here at the Canadian Club, we have always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas and inform the most relevant and compelling conversations of our time.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Wow, this crowd is so well trained. It's amazing. Just a little, I'm going to try that at home tonight with the kids for dinner. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Lowe, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and I am delighted to be here and to be your host today. I welcome those of you who are joining us online, thanks to the AV services of Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca. Today, we've got a special program at the Canadian Club. We explore Canada's immigration advantage. In the room and online, it's more than likely that one out of two of us wasn't born in Canada. So what is the Canadian advantage? And are we fully leveraging it? What else can and should be done as a matter of public policy and also as a matter of good business strategy? I really can't wait for our speakers to share their unique perspectives on this critical imperative for Canada. Today's conversation wouldn't be possible without the support of our partners. I would like to thank EY and PwC for their generous sponsorship of today's event. Thank you also to our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, for its ongoing support. I would like to acknowledge as well Canada's Forest Trust, whose commitment to acting on climate change is making all the difference. Our partnership with the Trust is reducing the carbon footprint of our entire season of Canadian Club Toronto events. We are also grateful to the Business Council of Canada for partnering today to make this event possible. Finally, I'd like to happily welcome two tables of young leaders who are joining us today from Toronto Metropolitan University, and I will ask them to stand, please, at our two flanking our room today. You are truly our leaders of tomorrow, so thank you so much for joining us. Now, given the proximate and personal nature of today's conversation, I am expecting and hoping for a lot of audience participation and questions. So please find the Q&A cards at your tables. Don't be shy. We'll have runners come around to collect them, and we'll get them to our moderator. And for those of you who are joining us online, you'll see the Submit a Question button on the right-hand side of the screen. Hit that, and we'll be sure to get your questions that way as well, anytime during the broadcast. And now to our panel. Our program today will begin with remarks from Goldy Hyder, President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, offering a global perspective, pun intended, on economic immigration. Following that, we will move to our esteemed moderated panel. So let me start first by introducing the panel itself. Victor Dodig, President and CEO, CIBC. Victor leads a team of over 47,000 team members from around the world, and literally around the world. He's a strong advocate for Canada and a proponent of economic growth to enable a more prosperous and inclusive future. He serves as the current chair of the Business Council of Canada and was president of the 2022 International Monetary Conference. Victor serves as chair of CIBC's Inclusion and Diversity Leadership Council and is also past co-chair of the Black North Initiative. Penny Wise, President 3M Canada. Penny has led 3M Canada since 2020 and has held a variety of senior leadership roles at 3M, including positions in marketing, commercialization, brand, as well as others. A passionate advocate for women, she co-chairs the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's Council for Women's Advocacy, which is a Business Council of Canada initiative as well. She served as campaign chair for the United Way, Elgin Middlesex in 2021. Martin Basiri, co-founder and CEO of ApplyBoard. Martin is an Iranian-born tech entrepreneur, co-founder and board member of ApplyBoard, a Kitchener-based international student edtech platform that achieved unicorn status just a few years ago. An innovator from a young age, he invented his first device at the age of 14. Martin attended Shiraz University, where he earned an electrical engineering degree, and he also received his master's degree in mechatronics engineering from the University of Waterloo. Moderating our discussion today is Patrick Brethour, editorials editor at the Globe and Mail. Patrick is a seasoned journalist and communications expert who has held a number of senior roles with the Globe and Mail, including Alberta bureau chief as well as British Columbia editor. And finally, Goldy Hyder, president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. The council represents the chief executives and entrepreneurs of Canada's leading companies. Previously, Goldy served as president and CEO of Hill & Knowlton Strategies, Canada. He has an impressive track record of community service and is also co-chair of the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada's Asia Business Leaders Advisory Council. And so at this moment, it's my pleasure to invite all of our panelists, as well as Goldy, to take the stage. Goldy, the Canadian Club podium is yours.
What is your immigrant story? Because unless you're Indigenous, every one of us has an immigrant story to tell. The only question is when it started and how it started. Mine is one of coming to Canada in 1974 with my family, my little brother. My parents had $28 in their pockets. Some of you came with more, some of you came with less. But for many, that's how our stories started. And we came here to make Canada home. And it's possible because immigration is a defining characteristic of Canada. Canadians support immigration. And I want to recognize our mainstream political parties, federally and provincially, we're a nonpartisan group, but when we see good policy being advocated for, we want to call it out. The support for immigration is not unique to any particular political party. There are some who may have different points of view on it, but our mainstream political parties, federally and provincially, have been champions for immigration. We must not lose sight of that because that's not common in many other countries. Immigration, frankly, and our system in particular, is the envy of the world. What gives us credibility in many ways is we choose immigrants, we select immigrants. And we do so hoping that we will give them an opportunity to be successful here in Canada. Competition, though, for that talent in 2023 is as intense as it's ever been. And ladies and gentlemen, it's only going to get worse. People are now also choosing countries. We're not just choosing them. And so in that backdrop, we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to attract the talent that we need to continue this journey called Canada and to make Canada home for not just immigrants, but the best and the brightest of immigrants around the world? And as I mentioned, as much as we're choosing them, they're choosing us. And today we have some work to do. My friend, the Deputy Minister, Fox from the federal government is here, and I want to thank her for being accessible and working with us in doing the kinds of things that we need to do, because people who want to come here don't discriminate between the private sector and the public sector. They look at Canada as one, and they want to know that we are working together to make their journey into this country as seamless as possible. And so we have work to do. And we are working together on addressing a backlog created by COVID. Everybody has a COVID story. That's the story of immigration. But we need to do better, and we need to do it quickly. We have a brand issue. If we can't process immigration applications the way our competition is processing immigration applications, they will choose somewhere else. Let me be clear, there will never be a day that someone doesn't want to come into Canada. But we need to make sure that we're getting the people who have the most likelihood of succeeding here, because that's how you maintain support for immigration. We need to make sure that perceptions out there that somehow immigrants are not a solution, but might be a problem, as we hear around housing, around healthcare, around retail, around restaurants. The fact is, ask anybody in the business community, immigrants are the solutions to those problems. It's a chicken and egg argument. If we don't get the people here, we won't be able to build the roads. We won't be able to give you the health care. We won't be able to get you the service in your restaurant. It's as basic as that. But we have to work at communicating that message, that immigration is a solution and it's not a problem. Now, the lesson of COVID that I referred to is business and government can work together. We can work together to build confidence in Canadians who just look to us to say, make my life as easy as possible, make things better, and I'm counting on you to do it. So despite all the attacks that take place on institutions out there, and social media and everything else, you should know that we in the business community have an open invitation to work with governments, federal, provincial, and municipal, as we did in COVID, and as we want to do in this issue, to solve problems together, to realize the dream of what people come to Canada for, and to make our country the greatest in the world. Patrick, over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that, Goldy. And as you mentioned, all of us in this room have, can you hear me? Yes. Have an immigration, no?
It's on.
Okay, we got it. There we go. Okay. It's a rare time when someone said, Pat, I can't hear you, please speak up. Thank you, Goldy, for that delightful setup and correctly pointing out that we all have immigration stories to tell. So on that theme, I'd like to just sort of preface a question with a bit of an introduction of our panel's own immigration stories, and then hand over to them for exploring different facets of this big challenge. So Victor, your father, I think, from Croatia arrived in the late 1950s, in Italy, and then moving on to Canada in 1961.
Yeah, came in as a refugee.
And a much different Canada then, a much different world, and a much different refugee and immigration experience. I'm wondering, what would be the difference, you think, between your father's immigration experience and what newcomers would be facing today?
There's some things that are similar, right? So part of it is just finding a job. It's not that easy. He came in as an unskilled laborer at the time, and he said that people would call them WAPs. You're without papers. It didn't apply to Italian immigrants only. If you were from Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and you had an accident, it applied to you as well. Finding a job was really hard, and getting to find a job when there's no internet, none of that stuff going on, that was really difficult. I found his chronology of his first 6 jobs over a period of 3 years, and his minimum wage going up from $1.63 to $2.80 an hour during that time. So jobs were difficult to find. I think that still holds true for immigrants today. He was unskilled, and for those that are coming in with skills, many of the skills aren't being recognized. And I call them soft trade barriers. You've completed your accreditation at another institution in another country, and maybe there's a few things you need to do to cross the goal line and practice that skill in our country, but those soft trade barriers exist. I'll give you an example. My wife's an immigrant. By the way, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Yeah. All right. We're going to the Raptors game tonight. So what we do every
She wants to go.
She wants to go.
Yeah, she wants to go.
We have this.
That's your gift to her.
No, my gift to her starts with a Valentine's Day card that I've pulled out for the last 27 years of our marriage to remind her of her long sufferance. It's the same card that comes on the kitchen counter. But she's highly educated lawyer, clerked at the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, and had to write her 5 courses to get accredited here. And she said, I don't understand why I have to write 5. I understand why I have to write a constitutional law course, but we live in a common law society. Why do I have to do administrative law in Canada? And she had to do all of that. And she's not practicing now, but she got through that all. And it took quite some time. That's true in the accounting profession. That's true in the healthcare profession. That still holds true in the legal profession. And when you look at healthcare in particular, where there's just an unbelievable long line of people waiting for doctors, for procedures, we should just advance those folks and not meet them in an Uber and say, what do you do? Well, I'm a doctor from Iran and I can't find a job here. That is a big deal, and that problem existed in the 1960s. It's a skilled problem today. Housing is clearly an issue, more acute today than it was back then. I grew up in Parkdale. So some of you have heard my story. I grew up in a house that's 3 stories. My parents bought their first home when I was just calculating their income. They made about $6,500 in a year. My mother cleaned houses, my dad worked in a factory, and they bought a house for $23,000. So about 4 times their gross income. They rented out 3 stories. The first floor, we kind of put plywood in between the living room and the living room. We had 2 bedrooms out of it, right? And just kind of made their way. You were able to make your way back then. Today, it's much harder. When you think of the ratios of income to home values, particularly in the urban centers, there are large, large gaps. So when I think about the challenges, they're the same, and they're different, right? A job as a skilled person is hard to find, just as it was for an unskilled person back then. Housing has become more of an issue than it was back then, and I think that is something that we can talk about today that is going to be the largest crisis if we don't get it right over the next 10 years.
Thanks for that. And I think that segues us nicely to a question I have for Penny. And Penny's story, a little bit of it, she moved from England to Canada with her family in 1969, and her family settled in Port Elgin, which, if I remember serves, was around 3,000, 4,000 people. Mm-hmm. So fair bit smaller than it is now, but that I think points to some thoughts you shared, Victor, on the cost of housing, particularly in urban centers. But what I wonder, Penny, is the challenge that smaller communities face in trying to bring newcomers and retain newcomers in their communities.
Right. So I just finished my immigration story. By the way, the immigration stories are aging all of us immediately, and I was like, not wanting to give out the date, but I was a very, very small child in 1969. My parents were living in London in the UK, and my father was hired by Ontario Hydro because they were starting up the nuclear program at the time. And he was recruited along with many other people from around the world, from across Canada, to come to Ontario to work on CANDO. So my parents left London, UK, big city, huge city, global city, and we ended up in Petawawa. I'm surprised my parents were still married. We were there for 6 months while my father trained for CANDO, and then we moved to Port Elgin, where he worked at Douglas Point, and where I grew up in Port Elgin. And lived there till 18 when he was transferred to Darlington, and I moved to Oshawa, and I'm not sure how I feel about that either, but that's a different. But as I was reflecting on this in small town, so what was interesting in the experience of Port Elgin, Kincardine, Southampton, all of those towns around Bruce Nuclear, was that they brought in people from around the world. And so, some of the things you talked about, Victor, were a little bit different because there was such an influx of immigrants and new people and newcomers that it changed the complexion of the towns, and it changed the expectation of what schooling would be like and after-school programs. And so all of us grew up in a very different kind of world than if you're an immigrant and you come to town and you're like the only person who comes to town. So as I look across, 3M's a manufacturer. We have 1,800 employees across Canada, 1,200 of them in manufacturing in our 9 facilities across the country. And we do have a challenge when we bring newcomers into the smaller centers, because we're not in major centers. Retaining those people becomes really difficult. It becomes difficult because there aren't as many support services in smaller urban centers as there are in the big cities. You're probably one of only a couple of people, or maybe one of one, and you don't see people like you don't see communities, you don't have mentors, you don't have champions. We find in some small cities like Brockville, where we have a manufacturing site, that if you come with a small family or if you have small children in your family, there are services. You get together in the community, you reach out, you branch out, and you connect. But if you have older children who are youth, terrible youth homelessness actually in the Brockville area, or if you're in your 20s and you have no family, there isn't the services to support you. There aren't a lot of restaurants. Or if you don't like junior A hockey, there's really nothing for you to get engaged with. So there really is this disconnect that's even more pointed in smaller communities than in the large urban centers. And so companies where you have manufacturing, we're really thinking about ways to engage. How do you create employee resource networks? How do you become a champion? So not just a role model, but how do you champion and lift people up and engage? So it really does become part of what we do as business to make sure that we're helping and embracing those people that we bring into our organizations.
Thanks for that. So there was, I think, a point that Goldy had raised that I know is near and dear to your heart, Martin, as well, but it's this idea that we're merely not sort of selecting whoever we want, that we are more and more in a competition for bringing people to Canada. So, and obviously we won the competition at least a little bit because you're here today. So you left Iran in 2010 and you studied mechatronics engineering at the University of Waterloo. You went to the US, but then you also, thankfully, came back.
Yeah.
And then you also worked very hard to bring your brothers here, which was the sort of nucleus that your whole unicorn sprang from.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what should we be doing for the next Martin and his brothers that are out there and we want them to come to Canada? What should we be doing better to make sure that we're as an attractive destination as we can be?
I tell a little bit before I come why I chose Canada. Because my dad studied in the US and went back to Iran, and I was always thinking, dream happens in the US. And I was an entrepreneurial kid from early age. My uncle was living in Toronto and came back to Iran, and he came to my lab and he's seen like I'm like a high school students like making all these circuits and I'm selling them. And he said, in Canada, this thing called called Dragon Den. And if you would have go in front of them and you show these circuits, they give you $50,000 to make a company. Guys, I'm not kidding, seriously. I said $50,000 to give a sense, like an engineer probably at that time make $2,000 a year. So 25,000 times of an engineer's salary. I said, okay, I'm going to Canada. Sure. Unfortunately, I didn't have money to come here, so I had to finish my bachelor. I've sold some more invention, but Waterloo gave me this chance to come here. They gave me $52,000 for 2 years of my study, for my tuition fee and living cost. And I'm thankful for the rest of my life to what they gave me. And the reason I said that is because what type of person we want to bring, we need to market that. I came here because Dragon Den, because I was an entrepreneur. So if we want to bring entrepreneur, we need to talk about our Canadian dreams. If we want to bring people in our smaller centers, we need to talk your story. We need to market that globally to target the right people. So I believe the total number of the people that we bring is about right, and it's all about targeting better and bringing, so of 500,000 people we bring the ones, and integration to the Canadian economy is very important. So let me give you one simple stat from StatCan. International students and the people who come here with work visa, right off the bat sponsored by the companies, means the moment they enter here, either they enter universities or they enter a company. 5 years out, they're almost 2 times making earning compared to all other immigrants. But if you compare their education at the time they enter Canada, these two groups actually have a lower education compared to other things, because on a skilled worker, we bring immigrants who have a high education. So it means integration. If we integrate with them, well, they make double almost 5 years out. So if we are bringing 500,000 people, and we can better plan them, target them, even our refugees, even our family sponsorship. And we make only $40,000 more earning per person. That's $20 billion per year. That's 0.7% of our GDP. So we can have additional 0.7% GDP growth by just targeting better. And if you tell me any other opportunity better than this, I would argue that. What should we do for addressing that? So one is marketing. Second, UK is issuing 80% of their visas under 2 weeks. Here, you're lucky if you get your visa under 4 months. UK has a predictability. Here, there's no predictability. 2 sisters goes exactly the same program. One of them gets rejected, one of them gets accepted. So I say again what Goldy said. I believe we always going to have millions of people want to enter Canada. But is that the 1 million that we need them here? We want them? We want the top 1 million. And those ones have options. They can, in 3 days, the entrepreneurs can go to UAE, go to a free zone, and make a tax-free living for the rest of their life and make a company in 3 days. They get anyone from anywhere in the world, even from North Korea, they can get them visa to go to Dubai. So look at right now what UK is doing. Look at Netherlands doing in Singapore, what they're doing for entrepreneurs. So the competition is coming up. We are still at the top. But when you are the top, what do? You use your advantage. Not only we don't celebrate we are the best, we should celebrate how far we are better than the next person. And I believe this is a one-time life opportunity we have as a Canadians to target the next, not only 15 years, to the rest of the century and say, what do we want to be in the 2100? Work backward, every single class of our immigration. We target the right people, we bring them, and we use information. There is huge information in the banks on the earnings. StatCan has huge information. We aggregate everyone using data, and we make the best country for people like us that we live here and for the rest of the world. And we show everyone what can a country do, even if there are like 38 million people, what the impact they can have globally.
Thank you for that. And just an observation, it might be painful to the Canadian psyche to brag about how we're a land of opportunity, but it strikes me, and it was something we were thinking about we wrote a year-end editorial about things that had gone right last year, and a record number of immigrants that saw Canada as a land of opportunity, and we should too, and we shouldn't be shy about that. So thanks for those observations, Martin. So
we should also recognize that things change quickly. When Maureen was applying to come up here in 1997 from Boston, the immigration lawyer said to her, "Why do you want to come to Canada? Everyone's going south." And the big topic was the brain drain. So 25 years later, we're not talking about the brain drain. We're talking about how to be better. And we shouldn't rest on our laurels and assume it'll keep going like this without leaning in. You're right. Absolutely.
So on that front, I wanted to ask each of you, in sort of more of a free-for-all, if you could change one thing to improve our immigration system, one thing to either better integrate or speed things up, dealer's choice, what would that be? So, who wants to?
I would change the software. I would make it on the behalf of I just built a better thing. It's very easy. Believe me, it doesn't cost $1.2 billion. We can do way better. And we just build it simple for a 16-year-old smart person. We build the software for them. What do? Swipe up, swipe right and left. With that, you should be applied to Immigration Canada.
Well, sounds like an RFP in the making. Ben?
So that is a big question for free-for-all. So, I talked about the importance of integration. I think that there is a role for government, for academia, for business to all come together to play to make sure that we are supporting immigration and people coming into Canada and making sure that they feel welcome, that they feel part, whether it's making sure their education, they're not driving an Uber, their education ramps up more quickly, whether it's services so they can settle, whether it's having housing and accommodation, whether it's engagement in the community. to make sure that we're bringing the best forward. And I also think that immigration also needs to be communicated and talked about in a way and marketed in a way. Canadians are smart people. We've talked a lot about how we have a shortage of nurses, we have a shortage of skilled trade, we have electricians, plumbers, kind of all of these core trades that we need. And for Canadians' way of life to continue, we need to have those people. We need to get it through two streams. People in Canada who reskill, who come into different trades, whether it's women or underrepresented populations, or through immigration. That is the way we're going to build the economy for Canada for the future. So it's about that combination and accelerating in the integration and inclusion.
Victor.
And I think we have to recognize some things are going on. Deputy Minister Fox is at my table and Minister McNaughton's at my table, and we chatted a little bit because we're sitting beside each other. But we all know what you're doing to modify the point system, to deal with the shortage of nurses and medical staff, to advance those in the construction trades so that they can get jobs here, because the classical point system doesn't favor them, right? So I do think, when you run a bank, people are always telling you, you should do this, you should do this, you should. I'm doing it, but it takes time for it to kind of sink into the system, right? So I have to recognize you as elected officials and our senior civil servants who make our country a better place, and I thank you for that, and I think they deserve a round of applause for what you're doing. On that point, in terms of what can we do, housing is a big one. We talk a lot about that, the housing affordability, and it's not about will house prices go down more. It's the availability of supply. It's going to become a bigger issue. Premier Ford's announced in Ontario alone 1.5 million homes or units over the next 10 years. That's almost twice what we've been delivering. And where's Jeff Smith, my friend Jeff Smith? We saw him here earlier. I was with him last night.
Yeah.
We were together last night, and I was saying, I'm not really sure we're very good at modular home building. And he sent me this long email at 10 p.m. before he goes to bed, because I guess he'll forget the next morning, that we're actually pretty good at this, and I could be better at this if I got a little more government support. So I think housing is a big deal. And now we need skilled trades. We need semi-skilled trades. We need unskilled trades. We need to do a lot more in terms of land availability, development charges. But if we don't get that right, we're going to have a social crisis of our own, because there are Canadians who've been here for generations. New Canadians want to establish a life here. They need a roof over their head, and we need to get that policy right and not wave the flag saying, isn't it great that everyone wants to come to Canada? The quality of life here has to be good as well. The whole ecosystem has to work. If they can't get a house, if they can't get a doctor, if they're struggling to get a job, that's not so good. That's not the kind of outcome we want.
Very true, very true. I believe if we align our labor shortage right on alignment of our immigration, a lot of the problems that Victor is saying with the government support also can be solved, because when we are going to the housing, one of the main problems is actually labor shortage. They don't have a labor to build the homes, so we can address that. We have to completely rethink how we are thinking about the healthcare. Increasing a little bit here and there is not solving 120,000. If you look at our fertility rate of 1.4, literally came from 1.7 few short years ago. This is dark. Just put it on Excel and you could see that what it means, half a population in our lifetime will be over 65. Who's going to work? And Canadian healthcare is something that is core values of us. We want to have the free healthcare. We are proud of that. We don't want being a country. Right now, look at what is happening in South Korea, what is happening by 1960. That country is going to be 36 million people. What happened to the young generation? They're all going to lose hope. You're not going to be able to tax people 70%, and we are not like Norway, have trillions of dollars in a sovereign fund that they can at least keep the ball rolling for years. We have to get to work, and we have to get to work yesterday to be able to do that.
1 in 5 Canadians don't have a family doctor, right? I mean, we've got 206,000 procedures in line in Ontario, and now we're trying to solve it with the new solution that's been put forth, which I think is a good one. But we need to be innovative on that front as well.
So, to tee off on that, and I think the credentials issue came up a few different times. Martin, you were talking about the obvious productivity uptick, if we can make better use of that human capital, gaps in the housing market. And then, I think there's also a basic equity issue of you came in here because of your skills, but we're not going to let you make use of them. Seems, perverse to say the very least. So what, How do we get past that credentials issue and sort of, I guess, unlock that full potential of the people that we're bringing to Canada each year?
I believe it goes even beyond the healthcare, and I would know how the solution. If I would have been you, the Deputy Minister of Immigration, what I would do, I would bring only 12 people to the room, and I would put the data of labor shortage and work from the toughest category, which is healthcare, and comes out. And imagine you have unlimited number of demand in the world, which we have, and then think from top, okay, nurses. Would nurses even be able to be certified? If not, let's not bring them. And then go to the provinces and said, either fix it or we're not gonna bring them. The sad thing is what Victor is saying. On the federal side, we allow a dentist to come in, and then on the provincial side, we don't let them work, and then they have to do Uber. How sad is it? Like, what type of, remember, that guy, the dentist that come here, is an uncle of the next person. You say, hey, uncle, what do you do in Canada? Like, you had a good dental office here, what do you do in Canada? I'm Ubering? What type of brand we want?
There's nothing worse than a shattered dream.
It's a broken promise.
Yep.
Exactly.
Minister McNaughton was talking about how in Ontario, they're thinking about how do you have company, like here's the list of people who are immigrants who want to come to Canada, here are the skills, and then matching the companies up versus bringing in. So I think we're in process to be able to do what you're talking about, is get some of that matching going.
One other thing that I add, right now almost half of the economic impact immigrants that we bring are through international education. And as you guys know, our entire higher education is dependent on international students, not only financially, but also by scholars. $23.7 billion added to the GDP directly.
It's one of the biggest current account contributors in the country is foreign students at post-secondary institutions.
Exactly. And we are in that business. There is one big flaw in that. So we have to, like what we do on ApplyBoard, we have to find those students. We have to find the people who can afford Canadian education from the countries that the average GDP per capita is $2,000. And what it costs here, minimum studies? $50,000, so $25,000, means we are constantly searching from top 1% wealthy people from around the world because we want them to have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to come here. However, when they come here, we want them to stay and contribute to our economy. And I'm talking about this for years, and finally I decided, you know what, we'll go and solve it ourselves. We need to change our mind. As much as we want the higher education, they get their fees and tuition fees because we want them to have a very prosperous higher education. We need to facilitate. So if you are a smart person, but you don't have $40,000 to come to this country, it's okay. We provide some form of a financial system for you, and it doesn't have to be scholarship. It could be loan, it could be ISAs, it's different formats. But we want your talent here, and we want your hope here. And just because you've born as a daughter of a teacher in Iran or Jamaica or another country, and you're an average family and you only have $5,000, which is normal for that country, we're not gonna shatter your Canadian dream. If you are willing to come here and work 12 hours a day, if you are willing to come here and become a nurse, if you are willing to come here and do the job, we want you here.
That sounds like the start of a great stump speech.
Thank you.
We have some questions from the audience. This one's for Penny and Victor, and I'll have one for you, Martin, as well. So for Victor and Penny, what efforts are you taking to champion a better immigration experience and a better integration experience?
You go first? Okay. I'll preface my comments with, I work for 3M, and 3M is a global company, and it is a company that recognizes that better ideas, better innovation, better products come out of inclusion and diverse ideas. And so what you see is a lot of people inside our organization who have traveled and worked in different parts of the world. So I myself have done a lot and worked on projects. I've also lived in the US for 10 years. And so I think that's just part of our culture and who we are and how we think about that immigration or that melding of ideas or bringing in the right talent and skills. From a 3M Canada perspective, very much focused, I'll go a little bit out on my STEM platform here, is we are very much a science company, and we recognize in Canada that 81% of Canadians believe that underrepresented populations, including immigrants, do not have access to STEM education or STEM jobs, and that's not just science and engineering, but also technology and skilled trades. So we've actually been working with advocates and leaders across the country to understand where can we make a difference, what are the things that companies like 3M, like large companies in Canada, small companies can do to improve and make things better. So we recognize things like improving education, and so people can be taught in ways that are important to them. That it's not just about a role model and seeing somebody like you in a job that you want to get to in Canada, but it's a champion. And I talked a little bit about, it's about lifting up and it's about giving people opportunities. And Martin, you just gave some great examples of how you're providing opportunities to people, and that's what we do. And then the third area is about action and not just words. And so whether we're giving out funding to groups to encourage girls to be part of science, or newcomers, or supporting newcomers who come to our different communities through employee resource networks or other groups within towns, that is what we are doing to improve the immigrant experience and newcomer experience in Canada.
Thanks.
Great.
Excellent. And Victor?
Well, we're really focused on culture and integrated collaborative culture at our bank. I see Sandy Sharman's here. She's our head of people, culture, and brand, and oversees all these things in terms of how we make our culture a better place. But we all own that as members of the CIBC team. I chair the Inclusion and Diversity Leadership Council. We have people networks from the broad spectrum of society. We want to make sure that our bank welcomes everybody, their views, their backgrounds, their perspectives. We can incorporate that in terms of who we are, but we can also share with them the things that we do as Canadians and as a bank to make our country and our bank a better place. And it's a bit of a two-way street in that regard. And I think those people networks work very well in terms of melding that culture. That happens sort of across the organization, but when you go down to the banking center level, if people are speaking a certain language in a certain area, they want to make sure that the bankers across from them speak that language as well. Not just English, but their own language, their native tongue. And that's important in terms of how we build our team. And that's where I say our team has to reflect the population that we serve. And that's our goal at the bank. And I think the third thing, and this goes beyond our bank, but it's how do you make immigrants feel welcome and how do you make them feel Canadian, right? And that's, everyone has a special way, but I always ask everybody, how many immigrants do you know? And what have you done to kind of help them along? And the story I always like to share is my mom cleaned houses for part of what she said, I cleaned houses, but then I was a cashier at Dominion. I said, yes, Mom, I know. But you clean houses for wealthy people. And because during the summer there was no babysitter, she'd bring me along at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8. And you'd sit there all day. You weren't allowed to watch TV. You just kind of kick around the yard. And I remember one of her clients, Mr. Longeaway, who was the chairman of a hospital, took me in his car one day and he said, let me show you how a hospital runs. Let me show you how a city runs. And I was always looking forward to seeing him every week. He made me feel Canadian.
Wonderful.
Nice.
That's what we need to do.
That's awesome.
And Martin, a question for you. So we were talking about immigration and integration from a numbers point of view, productivity, excellent points. But there's also that sort of lightning in a bottle possibility, which I think you embody as well. Just who could have foreseen that you would come up with your company? So this idea of innovation. So how can immigration be a driver, you think, of innovation?
Perfect. Yeah. So, very, very good question. So first
Not
of
my
all,
question.
Yeah. So let me rephrase again. Canadian government are right now at the oldest scale. And we work with all 4 countries, the 4 major English-speaking countries, is number 1. So kudos to both federal and provincial for a lot of great programs like Ontario nomination program. I see ONIP, startup visa and federal. So what we are talking about, we are Michael Phillips of immigration. We are the best, but that's not enough. We wanted the best of the best of the best. So this is this great program called Startup Visa, and that's how I got my permanent residency in this country, when it was a pilot program. Because, and what it says is like, if you want to like come here and start a company, and you can attract enough venture capital or get a letter of support from one of the government incubators, we will give you a shot to build it. And it's okay if you fail, because we value even that startup failure experience. So let me give you one stat. In US, that there are a lot of unicorns, and unicorns are the startups that are over $1 billion in valuations. 55% of the founders of unicorns are immigrant. And even though only 3% of higher education of US are international students who stays in the US, 25% of the unicorns founders are international students. Means technically international students are 8 times more likely to make a unicorn company. And I think the stats are very well laid out the system. And I don't know who came with the startup visa program. That's genius. We can completely go on it, make sure it doesn't get abused, and make it better and better. And also like kind of creating a path that the bigger companies like your company and your company can bring these entrepreneurial people and bring them, and not only like creating the new SMEs and startups, but also revolutionize how the companies go. Last but not the least, I think we need a vision between what is happening on the business side. Like, for example, we know AI and, for example, electrification of the cars are our next 10 years, next 15 years. That vision have to echo on our immigration. So if we want to be the AI super hub of the world, let's give them path. If you come here and study PhD at our U15, guess what? With your graduation, I staple a PR. If you are an AI scientist, I don't want you to leave this country. Why? Because in 15 years, I want to be #1 in the whole world. So I want you to be here. So if we take a little longer approach, which data exists? I have all the data. And guess what? Who did I get the data from? I requested act of information from the government. So if I could get the data, government has the data itself. We would be happy to like give their data back to them. It's so doable. It's so doable. I'm so excited for the future of Canada, and I know it's going to be bright.
Thanks for that. And I would just observe every single immigrant that comes to Canada is already an entrepreneur. They've uprooted their life. They've come here. They're risk takers. So we should keep that in mind for sure. On behalf of the audience, I just want to say thank you for the fantastic discussion. I certainly learned a lot. I hope you did too. Thanks so much for your time.
Goldy, Victor, Penny, Martin, thank you for your inspirational messages that you delivered today. Sort of integration, targeting, quality of life. I think when I bring those things together, it really is a virtuous circle. It's about how do we make the right interventions to keep it on that track. So thank you so much for your remarks and kind of very inspiring tone that you've set for all of us. Each of you are the types of allies and champions that we need in this country and in the positions of influence and power that you all are. And to Patrick, thank you for your expert moderation. Great lively kind of conversation, if not debate, kind of at some point in time. Very, very memorable for all of us, I would say. Before we close, let me just finish with a few housekeeping remarks about some of our upcoming events. On Friday, February 24th, we will be welcoming the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. And on Monday, let's see if I can say the month properly this time, on Monday, February 27th, we will host a timely discussion with forward-thinking executives on the international experience of employee ownership trust, another angle on the immigrant story as well, and how we're making it work here in Canada today. And finally, on Tuesday, February 28th, Bernard Lord, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, as well as CEO of MediaEvents, will speak about the changing healthcare landscape in our country. Visit us at canadianclub.org. You'll learn a bit more about the events, you can purchase your tickets, and also find out about membership there as well. Before we conclude, I'd like to offer another round of thanks to today's sponsors, EY and PwC. Thank you for your support in making our event possible. Members and guests, thanks for being here with us today. Take care and see you again soon.